Okay, we're back. So, again, terror and horror usually are words that are used interchangeably, but they're actually different concepts, and they are both important in creating the kind of Gothic aesthetic that we're discussing. So, terror is a special kind of feeling in that it's more of a sense of dread, anxiety, and impending doom before a horrifying event happens, versus horror, which we'll get to in a second. So, a sense of terror can be pretty prolonged. Horror is much quicker. So, with terror, it's this feeling that reality is somehow alien. Everything feels different, and it feels menacing to you. And over the course of a story, the characters and the readers become increasingly unable, my apologies, to trust and rely on their own rational minds. So you see this kind of thing a lot in horror films where at the beginning or horror stories of various kinds, at the beginning, everyone's got rational explanations for everything that's going on, and that there's always that one holdout character who refuses to acknowledge what's going on and has to come up with a rational explanation for everything. And that usually that person's kind of annoying in that way. But you also think to yourself, okay, I'd probably be that person too. I know I would be. But I am that person a lot of the time. I'm kind of a bummer in that way. But then the more and more though, over the course of the story, characters and viewers or readers for us, for literature, you become more and more unsure about whether you can actually trust what you usually know to be true, like that you can rely on your rational mind to figure things out. Like you start to really sense that there may be something far more sinister at play and that defies explanation in some way. Whereas horror is the immediate and overwhelming shock felt during the event itself. So terror is all about the buildup. Horror is about that extreme shock that happens when, think about for a movie where there's all this buildup of, let's say, a serial killer, like some kind of insane killer, and then they may not, throughout the film, there's just that building sense of dread and terror, and then finally there's the reveal, they got the chainsaw or whatever, and that moment where the maybe the person standing in front of that chainsaw wielding maniac, that facial expression that they make, we're all thinking about it right now, right? That's horror. And we're supposed to feel that too when we watch. Or it might be faced with something horrifying, it might be an intense loathing or intense disgust at what's been revealed. I'm trying to think of a good film example for that. Rosemary's Baby is a pretty good example of that, kind of like a combination of shock and disgust and everything when she discovers what's really, if you haven't seen that film, it's a classic. It's a really good example actually of like a buildup of terror and then the horror reveal at the end, because it's both shocking and disgusting, and it's every kind of feeling you could have. It's a lot of mixed emotions leading up to and during the event. So if you haven't seen that film, it's going to be on TV. Halloween is right around the corner. So or get it on Amazon Prime or something. It's worth the watch. It's a slow burn, but whoo boy, the payoff is fantastic. And that sense of like physical repulsion at what has been revealed as well, just being totally repulsed or disgusted by something. And it's very climactic. It's usually the moment of most intense feeling in the entire story. So it's going to be that kaboom kind of climax, which I'm sure in your 102 class you talked about, the basic plot diagram where there's the build up to the climactic moment and then everything's kind of in free fall after that. So if you were in pull that down for you a little bit. If you were in my class, my face-to-face class, I would ask you to find an example of each. So an example of terror and an example of horror from any of your assigned Edgar Allan Poe or Hawthorne readings. And there's plenty to go around for sure. Okay, so speaking of Hawthorne, I know there's Edgar Allan Poe is a pretty pretty familiar figure. And if he's not, feel free to take a moment to look him up. He's a much discussed figure, and so for that reason, I'm not going to take a ton of time to go over his biography. If that's something that you'd like to explore for your free-for-all project, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But Nathaniel Hawthorne is a little less well-known, and I wanted to take some time to tell you more about him going forward. So he was actually born in Salem, Massachusetts. Yes, that Salem, Massachusetts. And that's going to be pretty significant, actually. His father died when he was quite young, so that, of course, left some scars. And he lived in a pretty isolated state with his mother, who never got over the death of the father, and basically kind of their whole lives were really revolved around being isolated from everybody and just being in a constant perpetual state of grief for the loss of the father. So not not the most cheery and chipper childhood for young Nathaniel. His great-grandfather was actually one of the judges in the Salem witch trials, and that's actually pretty important for the rest of his for Hawthorne's life. He felt that his family had been cursed by their close connection to the event forever. He truly felt that they were cursed by what had happened, what they had done. Of course, he didn't personally, but it's one of those sins of the great-grandfather sort of thing. And we'll talk more about the ways that he felt like he was cursed by that event. So his family was very well, as all the judges in the trial would have been, and as is frankly still true more or less to this day. His family was very wealthy and influential during Puritan times, and they benefited directly from the trials, because here's the thing: like, once those people were tried and convicted, especially if they pled guilty too, which a lot of people did, everything was taken from them. Their property, their land, everything that was of any value was taken from them and redistributed among the people who had convicted them. So there was a lot of money to be made in what happened during the witch trials, and that's that can't be ignored when talking about like why there was such a frenzy for all of that to happen. And his family benefited directly from the wrongs done to these people, and as inherited wealth tends to do, he benefited directly from them, and his family was still well off, and that's something he felt cursed by. So for this reason, why is this important? Well, hopefully you'll be able to make the connection. You'll see that there's a pretty strong undercurrent, real theme of shame, the concept of shame, in most of his writings. So keep an eye out for that, because he definitely felt a lot of shame. So again, his ancestor being John Hathorne, the judge, he actually was so embarrassed by this. The name was so associated with the trials that he changed his name to Hawthorne from Hathorne after college, because he was so ashamed. It'd be like, the reason why there probably aren't anyone with like the last name Hitler anymore. There were lots of people with last name Hitler, but now it's like, well, time to change your name. You may not have personally done anything, but you don't want to walk around with that stamp on you. So he didn't either. And he believed that, for him anyway, writing was a purifying act, and it is one of the ways that he could atone for the sins of his family. So some quotes, some things that Hawthorne said. The wrongdoing of one generation lives into the successive ones. So something to think about. He clearly held a very dark view of human nature. He believed that people are inherently self-seeking, and he believed that evil is the dominant force in the world, not good. So pretty negative. Another quote from him: "What other dungeon is so dark as one's own heart? What jailer so inexorable as one's self?" He did not enjoy living in Salem, the town of Salem. He even said, "I detest this town so much that I hate to go out into the streets or have people see me." So this is something that you might want to keep in mind when reading his stories, particularly Young Goodman Brown and The Minister's Black Veil. In terms of his literary career, you may have had to read The Scarlet Letter in high school. That is his most famous writing. We're not going to read that. We're just going to read some of his short stories. But like a lot of his work, it was set during Puritan times and deals with the consequences of disobeying the community's imposed morality. And he was one of the first writers to really explore the hidden motivations of characters. So that's something to look for as well. That we all have secrets and hidden motivations. And he said that the world owes all its onward impulses to men ill at ease, that comfortable people don't create. It's uncomfortable people who are creative. He also said, no man for any considerable period can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true. I like that quote a lot. And the image there on the side is actually an artistic representation of the minister's black veil, one of the stories that you're going to read. Why there are so many fingers on that hand, I don't know. Pretty creepy. So kind of circling back here at the end to the Gothic themes of guilt, the strangeness, the uncanny, strangeness within the familiar, the bipart soul, the rational and irrational sides of ourselves, and abjection, this desperate need to cast out something that is socially wretched or disturbing or contemptible. If you were in class, I would ask you to find an example of two of these themes in Hawthorne's writings, which probably wouldn't be terribly hard if you were paying attention to what you read. So that's it. That is the end of Gothic Lit, and I look forward to getting your insights on the discussion board. Have a great week.